Is contentment a choice? If you have young children, maybe at times they're discontented. Every so often when I'm at work at Walmart, there's a child who is discontented. What's that temper tantrum? I was that kid when I was young. I was the happy and satisfied, or I'm going to pound on something. I grew out of that. But is contentment a choice? We are starting this new series, strategically starting the year with this series called Plant Gardens. And this is a look at embracing the sovereignty of God. And it comes from Jeremiah 29, and as we go through this, we'll go through a good portion of that chapter. And there's verses in this chapter that are at the bedrock of who we are as a church and why we exist and why we exist where we exist. And we'll get into that in the later weeks. But this phrase, plant gardens, comes from Jeremiah 29. And I believe when you read through this chapter, the thing that you see evident is Jeremiah's call for the people to embrace the sovereign will of God. That sovereign, that term is like God, he is in charge. He is reigning, he is in control. And as people, we can fight against that or we can embrace that. And it's a choice we make. So we're going to look at that. But before we get there, we're going to jump back into Exodus. And in Exodus 12, what's happening is the first Passover. And now the people of Israel, they don't really understand it yet because it's the first time it's happening. And in Exodus 12, starting at verse 11, it says, "These are your instructions for eating this meal." Now, remember, they are currently still slaves in the land of Egypt where they've been for hundreds of years. And Moses is actively appealing and demanding from Pharaoh to let them be set free. And there's been a series of bad things that have happened, like frogs and flies and darkness, and you can read all about it. And then in verse 11 it says, "These are your instructions for eating this meal. Be fully dressed." And that's a good idea for most meals. Just throw that out there. "Wear your sandals and carry your walking stick in your hand. Eat the meal with urgency. For this is the Lord's Passover. On that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. But the blood on your doorpost will serve as a sign, marking the houses where you were staying." And he'd given them instructions to take a lamb and to mark their doorpost with the blood. This is gory. This is how the old world did things. Just paint your doorpost if you want nowadays, but this is what God had them do. "And if you saw, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. This plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. This is a day to remember. Each year from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is a law for all time." And that's why if you look at a calendar, it'll still have Passover on the calendar. This is an event happening thousands of years ago, still practiced and still remembered today by all observant Jews. This is a law for all time. Skipping to verse 31, it says, "Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron during the night. 'Get out,' he ordered. 'Leave my people and take the rest of the Israelites with you. Go and worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you said and be gone. Go, but bless me as you leave.' All the Egyptians urged the people of Israel to get out of the land as quickly as possible, for they thought, 'We will all die.' The Israelites took their bread dough before yeast was added. They wrapped their kneading boards in their cloaks and carried them on their shoulders. And the people of Israel did as Moses had instructed. They asked the Egyptians for clothing and articles of silver and gold. The Lord caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites, and they gave the Israelites whatever they asked for. So they stripped the Egyptians of their wealth. That night, the people of Israel left Ramses and started for Succoth. There were about 600,000 men, plus all the women and children. A rabble of non-Israelites went with them, along with great flocks and herds of livestock. For bread they baked flat cakes from dough, without yeast, for they had brought from Egypt. It was made without yeast because the people were driven out of Egypt in such a hurry that they had no time to prepare the bread or other food. So they leave quickly. They don't even put yeast in the bread, and that's why on Passover they as part of the whole thing, like there's not yeast, and they do the flat bread. Unleavened, that's the word I was thinking. That's the word I couldn't think of. I'm like, there's a word for that. So every year now, the Israelites, Jews, today, they celebrate and they remember God's deliverance. They remember a time when God worked in a fashion where they had to hurry, where they ate with their walking stick in hand, and they left quickly because God was delivering them with speed. And they remember a time when they were leaving a place that wasn't their home to go on a journey to go and find their home. And they were being delivered. But now we skip ahead hundreds of years to Jeremiah 29, and something opposite is happening. In Jeremiah 29, God's plan is decidedly different from what it was in Exodus. In Exodus, they were being delivered, and in Jeremiah 29, they have been exiled. They have left their home and have been sent to a foreign land where they are not citizens. And they are being told, as we'll read, that God is going to leave them there. Instead of hurry, they're going to be told to settle in, to find contentment, and to wait. So let's read from Jeremiah 29. Just going to look at verses 1 through 6, and we're going to focus mostly on the last couple of verses. The first few verses just provide some context and some weird names. So there you go. Jeremiah wrote a letter from Jerusalem to the elders, priests, prophets, and all the people who had been exiled to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. So Jeremiah the prophet is in Jerusalem currently. He's writing a letter to those who have been exiled to Babylon. Now, when I was looking up how far does this letter have to travel and how far did the people have to travel, the article I read said it wasn't that big of a deal. Wasn't that far to walk. And I kind of shook my head. I'm like, the guy who was writing this is crazy. He said it's about 1,700 miles. They took this route that went along the river, so they went about 1,700 miles. You could make a shorter route, but there wasn't really roads for it. They said it's not a big deal because the Oregon Trail is actually like maybe a little longer. And I thought to myself, the world has changed where walking 1,700 miles is like, we just spend about 4 months on this journey to get there. Who does that? And I got to thinking like, Levon and I, we'll go on a vacation this year, I hope. And I was thinking like, maybe we'll decide to walk. We'll save on airfare. Like, let's go out to the Redwoods. It's like 1,900 miles. We'll just walk. We'll see you guys in like 8 months from now because it'll take us 4 to get there and 4 to get back. So this letter, it's not like the mail today. It's not like Amazon where I can get same-day delivery. This is an investment. So this was after King Jehoiachin, the queen mother, the court officials, the other officials of Judah, and all the craftsmen and artisans had been deported from Jerusalem. He sent the letter with Eliasis, I think, Elasa, maybe, son of Shaphan, and Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah. Then they went to Babylon as King Zedekiah's ambassadors to Jerusalem. This is what Jeremiah's letter said. And now, this is not related to this term, this is just good advice. If you're sending a letter that's going to take 4 months to get where it's going, make it count. Right? Make it count. So this is what it says. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to all the captives he has exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem. Build homes. And we don't know if there's like a greeting like, hey, this is Jeremiah, because it just starts with this. The first thing out of his mouth, the first thing that he wrote on the letter is, build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat the food they produce. Remember, this is bad news for the people getting the letter. They've been exiled to a foreign country where they don't want to be. And they want to get back home as soon as possible. And the first thing out of Jeremiah's mouth is, build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat the food they produce. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that they may have many grandchildren. Multiply. Do not dwindle away. See, oftentimes our plans are made for days and years. How many of you guys, at the beginning of the year, you got a new calendar? I got a new calendar. I guarantee my calendar is cooler than yours. Mine is a calendar of cryptids in national parks. So it's like Bigfoot and Kupachara and the cryptids in national parks. That's my calendar. Lavon loves it. So you get a calendar and you start writing stuff out. And you are planning for the next days and months and maybe year. How many of you guys have started writing in a calendar? Anybody? You guys are behind the ball. A lot of you guys, your life is going to be so disorganized come February. But most of you, if you begin writing in your calendar, you're not to the end of the year yet, are you? We don't really plan our days out that far in advance. Our plans are made for days and years. God's plans are for generations. Let that sink in. When God looks at you, he has a plan for your life. And his plan is not just for, it is for days, but it's not just for days or even just for 2026. He has mapped out his goodwill for your life to the generations. Build homes. Plan to stay. Plant gardens. Eat the food they produce. Have your kids get married. And then they have kids. Oh yeah, and you're in exile in a foreign land you don't want to exist in. You're not a citizen there, and your heart tells you you don't belong there. You're 1,700 miles from a home that you know you will never see again. And so we're kicking off the year with plant gardens, embracing the sovereignty of God. So what is a garden? How many of you guys will plant a garden this spring? A lot of you. I don't know if what we plant counts as a garden. Like, do you have to have more than 6 plants for it to be a garden? What's the standard here? Can you have 4 plants and can it be a garden? All right, maybe we'll plant a garden. We have typically just done like some tomatoes. In the past, we have planted gardens. But what is a garden? Plants? Now, we got to have some context. Think of the times in Scripture when it talks about a garden. Garden of Gethsemane. The handful of times when it talks about gardens, or think about the produce that is mentioned in Scripture. Now remember, Jeremiah is writing to to Israelite people. So what is the produce that they talk about when Jesus gives some parables, when they're talking about like barley and wheat sometimes? More often than not, they're talking about fig trees, olive trees, grapes. When they think of planting a garden, they're not thinking tomatoes that are ready in 50 days. That's what I think about. If I plant this now in May, will I have tomatoes in July? But for these people, to plant a garden is to plant an olive tree that my kids will enjoy. And my grandkids will have. There's olive trees that we still have today that we say are about 2,000 years old in the Middle East. And so the idea of plant a garden is not, it does involve some barley or some wheat, some things that they would harvest and eat that following like that harvest time. But a lot of the garden is generational. It's for their kids. And you think also, like, when Jesus would often go to pray, where would he go? Garden. So a garden wasn't just about food, and we have this today sometimes too. A garden is a place to go and find some peace and some solitude and maybe some quietness. It's a place to go enjoy. But remember, where are they? They're exiles in Babylon. Sometimes God's plan is for us to plant a garden in a place we don't want to be. I don't know what God's plan is for your life this year, other than I know this. His plan is for you to plant a garden. I'm not talking about seeds in the ground. I'm talking about seeds in people. His plan for you is to be part of his work, to plant a garden, to invest in people, to invest in making your circle better because you are there and you have the Spirit of Christ in you. His plan is for you to plant a garden, and sometimes it's going to be in a place you don't want to be. I can't make promises to you that God's plan for you in 2026 is going to be all the things you really like. It may not be. I hope it's a great year for you. I can't promise that. At the beginning of most years, we evaluate the prior year, right? How many of you guys thought a little bit, maybe you don't sit down and make like a big deal of it, but you kind of, it's just natural, you kind of evaluate like what the last year was like. What are the things that you did where maybe you went on a special vacation, or maybe you welcomed a new member to your family, or something, like you evaluate like what's happened in the prior year. Maybe you started a new job. And then we look forward to the new year. And it's the 4th of January now, so if you haven't done this yet, you're already behind the times. It's been 2026 for like 4 days now. And it's common to think about the things we want to change, or ways we want to better ourselves. And so for some of you, you might think, I'm going to give up smoking or swearing or sugar or whatever it might be. Maybe for some of you, you decide you're going to take up smoking or swearing or sugar, whatever it might be, I don't know. But we think of how we want to better ourselves. But I want to challenge us to shift our gaze a little bit. See, what if God is asking us to trust him and let him take us to places that we don't anticipate or sometimes don't want to be at? What if our focus is to plant gardens wherever God has placed us? What if our goal for 2026 is to learn contentment with God's plan and purpose in our life? What if at the end of 2026, you could look back and say, for everything that happened, for every place God had me, I was content because it was His will. I was content because I knew He had a plan and a purpose for me to be there. See, contentment is an agreement we make to embrace the sovereign plan of God. This is how I define contentment. God is sovereign, He is in charge, and I believe He has a plan in place for my life. And to be content is for me to agree, to make an agreement with Him that I'll be there. God, wherever you take me, wherever you place me, whoever you place beside me, in whatever circumstances or situations, Father, you are sovereign, and I know you love me, and I know you are good. And so I'm going to choose contentment. I'm going to choose to be there and look for the ways that I can plant a garden there. How can I step into that circumstance, that situation, that relationship, and in the midst of that, bring some newness of life? In the midst of that, plant something that will have benefit, not just to me, but for all those who come after. In Matthew 7, Jesus is talking, and he's trying to define for the people, this is towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and he's trying to define for the people, like, what does it mean to follow me? What does it mean to be my true disciple? And he says, not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter. And so he has this harsh definition of what it is to follow him. You have to actually do the will of his Father. On Judgment Day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name and cast out demons in your name and performed many miracles in your name. But I will reply, I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's laws. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against it, that house will collapse with a mighty crash. When Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching. Now, what is a house on sand? That's beachfront property. That's a house with the best view. That's a house you want to go to, right? Who of you, if you could choose to have an awesome house overlooking the ocean, would say, nah, I'd rather have a cornfield? Now, we're where we're at because of God's sovereign plan. And some of us like the Midwest and think the coasts are crazy. But a house on sand that's beachfront property. That's a house built without the time taken to make a proper foundation. Now, I built a house once, and the first steps are not the fun steps, right? When you first of all get your plans, everything is regulated by the county and state, and so you can't do anything without their permission on your own land. Very frustrating. Because I didn't buy it. I'm buying everything, and you're telling me what I can do with what I'm buying. Seems unfair. But they have to approve your plans, and part of that is you have to have the foundation. And then what happens is you do all the work for the foundation, In our case, this is Indiana, we built a house, a single-story ranch-style house without a basement, because it's pretty common in that part of the country to not do basements. And so we poured the footers of the foundation. It was, I don't know, like a couple feet of like solid concrete, and then from there we did blocks to the height we wanted. But before you do any, like you dig it, you pour it, and then what happens is you can't go forward on the parts of the house that are actually fun, like when you actually start putting walls up and it starts to take shape, like that's the fun part of building. Before you can do that, you have to have your foundation inspected by the city or the county. They have to come out and inspect it and give you the green light to move ahead. They want to make sure that your foundation meets code and meets all the requirements for the type of house you're building on it. And what Jesus is saying to these people, you and I, is that the foundation work is maybe the most important. And what I'm saying to you is I think learning to embrace the sovereign plan of God in your life is foundation work. And until you are willing to surrender to God being sovereign in your life, you can't move forward. Until you're willing to surrender and say, God, I don't know why you have me here right now. I don't know why I'm in this circumstance. I don't know why I'm struggling with this, but I trust you. Until you can get to that spot, you can't hardly move forward in your life. And Jeremiah is telling the people, look, you may not like where God has placed you. You've been exiled. You've been disciplined and sent to a foreign country 1,700 miles away, and you're going to live there and die there, and your children are going to live there and possibly die there, and your grandchildren are going to be born there and then uprooted and taken back to the country they've never been to. And Jeremiah is saying, embrace the will of God and trust him and learn to be content with it. And I don't think that what God has for you in 2026 is going to maybe be as extreme as what happens in Jeremiah 29. But we must learn to embrace the sovereign plan of God in our life and learn contentment and to embrace that. And when we do that, we can learn to plant a garden there. When we finally get to that spot where we're content with the sovereign plan of God, we can then look at how we can make things better in the lives of people around us. We can learn to say, okay, I may not be where I want to be, but I'm going to bring some beauty here. If I have the Spirit of God in me, then I have a choice to make to plant a garden, to look at the people around me and say, how can I help them? How can I improve their life? How can I plant a garden? See, to plant a garden is to invest in the future. That's what God was telling them. Plant a garden. Your grandchildren will enjoy the olives that you're planting today that you won't enjoy. Because depending on how old the people were and how long it takes the olive tree to mature, right? To plant a garden is to find beauty and joy after brokenness. To plant a garden, you first got to dig up the soil. You first got to interrupt what's going on at that spot of ground. And you break it up and you till it and you prepare the soil. When I was a kid, my grandma used to plant a garden, and it was way too big. And when you're a grandchild, you get commanded what you have to do in life. It's just the way it is. And so, and on my dad's side, this is the grandma on my dad's side, and a lot of us grandkids, my cousins, her grandkids, we all lived on the same gravel road. And like 20 some of us. It was crazy and incredible. We could go play football and we'd have like full teams and everything, and we're all cousins. And we had the run of the neighborhood. And the neighborhood was a gravel road, like with most family, just the only people who live there. And my grandma would plant this garden. And this garden was bigger than the ballroom. She was crazy, but she knew all the grandkids would weed it and snap the beans and pick the tomatoes and do all of that. Like, We weren't slave labor because we got paid with cookies, but, and love. But as a kid, wasn't too fond of it. As a kid, I was like, why do I have to go work in Grandma's garden? It's hot. I'm sweaty, and it's like I can have more fun getting sweaty playing football than pulling weeds. But I did it because I was the grandkid. Sometimes God's plan is for us to find joy in the hardest circumstances we've ever been in. And when I look back at my childhood now, my grandma passed away maybe 7 years ago. And when I look back at that season of life, because once I became an adult, I moved out of state, and I didn't really see my grandma much after that. And as a young man, you tend to move on with life, and I would get back like once or twice a year, and I just didn't get to visit with them much. And now they're gone. And now when I look back, I treasure the memories of working in the garden with my grandma. But at the time, I didn't like it. But looking back, because that's what reminds me of her. They farmed, they had a dairy farm and gardened, and they canned, and all of the stuff all the kind of the lost arts of the Midwest that we don't do that much anymore. And looking back, I'm glad I did that. Looking back, I treasure the times of snapping peas and pulling weeds and hanging out with my cousins up at my grandma's house. But at the time, I went complaining. At the time, I begged my mom to make up some excuse why I didn't have to go help in the garden. Sometimes God's plan is for us to find joy in the hardest circumstances we'll ever be in. And for me, that's a silly example. You'll face some circumstances that you don't want to be in, and I think God's plan is for you to find joy there. And I don't think the joy will always be immediate. You may not see it right away. But as you do what Jeremiah said, and you plan to stay, you accept God's plan, you accept His sovereign will in your life, and He's placed you there, and as you embrace that, you can begin to find joy there. And so as we kind of wrap up, the worship team is going to come up and we're going to sing one more song. And as they sing, I'm going to invite you to pray. And we have, up in the corner up here, we have, this corner is kind of being designated as a spot for prayer. And so as we wrap up, I want you to think about this question. Will you invest in God's plan, even if it isn't what you want it to be? Will you just be willing to say, God, I don't know if your plan for 2026 is what I want, but I trust you. And I'm willing to plan to stay and plant a garden. I'm willing to put some roots down right there and be there. I'm willing to look around at the people and places and the relationships and figure out how I can plant a garden, how I can try to bring some joy and some positivity and bring the good news right there. And so the worship team is going to sing, and as they sing, if this resonates with you and you realize that 2026 is going to be about planting a garden in the places God has you, and you want some prayer about that, would you come up to this front corner? And there'll be a couple others who may come and pray with you. But just come and confirm in your heart and tell God you're willing to invest, to surrender, and to plant a garden where He has you.